Today is July the 24th, 2014. Yes. My name is Tanya Finchum, along with Alex Bishop, and we're with Oklahoma State University. And today we're in Norman, Oklahoma, to speak with Allan
Oehlschlager.
And this is part of our 100-Year Life project, so thank you for having us today.
You're very welcome.
Let's start with having you tell us when and where you were born.
It was April the 13th, 1914, at 2601 Cleveland Street in Kansas City, Missouri. And don't go looking for it because it's not there anymore.
And what did your parents do for a living?
My father worked for American Steel and Wire Company, which is a division of U.S. Steel. They sold fencing and wire cabling, that sort of thing. And then he and my mother, in the 20s, began building houses on speculation. And and they pretty much stayed in that business most of their lives. It was sort of a second business for my dad. My mom pretty much ran the operation, but they draw the plans and hire the subs, and they were kind of general contractors.
Kind of unusual for a woman to do that at that time.
It was. She didn't even know how to drive a car. And we had an old Marmon, which is a huge car, probably about fit in here. But I mean, it had a steering wheel probably 2 feet in diameter. And my mom was probably 5'1", weighed 100 and maybe 20 pounds. And I should just sit on a couple of pillows and to learn to drive. She never knew how to drive till she drove that car. But it was a big gear shift, like a bus, and I can still see her just driving that thing down the street.
A challenge to park.
What?
It'd be a challenge to park.
Oh yeah, it would be. She didn't have to usually at the building site. I mean, there's always plenty of room, and going shopping. I don't recall clearly how she went downtown to shop much. Yeah, but she and her sisters. She had 3 sisters, and they all lived in a cluster. Wherever we moved, they all moved, and so they got together and sewed and made their own clothes. And I think she learned it from her mother as far as sewing and that sort of thing. But any business sense, the German people, we spoke German until I was 5 years old.
Okay.
And the German people are kind of clannish, I think. And at least when they were migrating to this country back in the early 1900s, and which brings me to my grandfather, who was a minister, and he could preach in German or English. So the Methodist convention, they had a jam there. He could send him to any of these little communities outside of Kansas City, and where he'd set up a ministry and take his 4 daughters with him, and he did well. And I would, how they did it back in those days, I'll never know. But I figured out one day I doubt if he made over $600 a year and raised a family of 4 daughters.
Did he go by horse? I guess at that time it would have been.
I think he must have done some things on the side that bring in a little bit of cash or something.
When he was a minister, though, did he travel?
He was a minister. Yeah. Yeah.
Did you have brothers and sisters yourself?
I had a brother and an adopted sister. An older brother, 3 years older, and then an adopted sister, which we adopted in 1919 during the flu epidemic that ravaged the country back in the early 20s.
Do you remember much more about that period?
Mm-mm. No. I just remember my mother always wanted a daughter, and she'd lost her first child, which was a girl. And so when things were right, and there were a lot of children up for adoption in that period of time, so she picked out my sister, and we had her till she was 85.
Well, how about your brother? How long did
My
he
brother is 3 years older than I. He was a doctor, and he did one of the dumbest things a doctor can do. And when he did it, he lived in Odessa. Called me and said, "Down, I think I've done something stupid." And he had pricked himself with a needle that he had just used to inject a patient that had hepatitis. And in a week he was gone.
Wow.
71. Really, he's a brilliant guy. But that pretty much was my family. As I said, we lived in like little settlements. There were four daughters, one never married, and the other three. My mother was the oldest. But we built a house here on the corner, and one here, and then one over here. This one never went in the row. I mean, it always had to be around the corner or something. And he was married to one of my mother's next oldest sister. And bright guy, I mean, he's sharp. But he was just independent. He was published extraction, and he just had to be different, I guess. But he was very successful in his life, and as a builder of houses, but we all, you just couldn't imagine how we lived back in those days. But on Fridays, my mom and two of her sisters, one unmarried, Emma, and my favorite, and they would start baking, and they'd bake coffee cakes and cinnamon rolls and bread, and I'd give my friends a taste of them, and their mom was one. So pretty soon I had a route. We bake extra ones, and I'd go around selling them. And, so, it turned out pretty good, but they were busy all the time, and as I said, I don't remember them spending much money on clothes or anything. They'd make them all, and they looked pretty well dressed. But our life was pretty much wrapped up into church, and we'd go Wednesday nights, and Sunday mornings and Sunday evenings.
Was the service in German, or was it in English?
The ones I went to were in English. Mm-hmm. But as I say, my grandfather could preach in either German or English, and the Methodist Church has a conference, and they encompass certain areas, and there's a bishop, and he appoints ministers to those various churches. They still do it now, and so my grandfather preached in quite a number of recently developed German communities in Kansas, near Kansas City, and in Missouri, and was quite well known in that area. But these were small congregations; they weren't huge. But it was very, real comforting to them. They could listen to a sermon in German, and they didn't have to try so hard to understand. And they finally grew in their understanding of English. But that's just kind of how the country grew that way.
Well, talk a little bit about your early schooling.
Well, my first schooling was in Kansas. It was in Kansas City. It all was, but right near where I was born, just about a block away, in Greenwoods Elementary School, and I went to first grade there. Then we moved clear out to the south end of Kansas City, which it was always growing south, and we went out to 57th Street from 26th Street. There was nothing south of 57th Street, and So we built 3 houses here and one around the corner. and that was the time I was growing up, like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then when I was about 12, we moved out farther south. And I was in I guess you'd call it middle school. It was the 7th and 8th grades. I had to get on a streetcar and go from 67th Street down to 39th Street and get off and walk to a junior high school. So I did that for 2 years. But before I did that, I got up early in the morning through newspapers off the back of a converted pickup truck. And you stood down there and rolled up the papers and threw them. And then I was only probably 12, 13. Yeah, but get up at 5 o'clock and do that.
Was that the Kansas City Star?
It was a Kansas City Star, Kansas City Times.
Do you remember
Had 2 papers.
how much you got paid?
Yeah, I got 50 cents.
For a day or a week or what?
No, for a day.
For a day?
Yeah, my brother and I both threw papers, and the Sunday paper was so big you couldn't throw it that far, so I had to get out and wherever there were big porches, I could just throw it on the porch. But
did you choose to do that, or did your parents?
no, I
encourage you to?
don't know how. We just did it. I mean, I did it. My brother was doing it, so I did it. It's kind of how things go.
And how did you spend some of that money?
We always gave our money to my mother.
Oh.
She was the banker. And if you needed some, she'd dole it out to you.
Could you use some of it for fun?
Well, you'd save up for a scooter, you'd save up for the skates or whatever was going on. And we usually had something. And then pretty soon, I think when I was about 13 or 14, I started saving my own money. And I saved up enough to buy a motorcycle.
Oh.
And I had, one time I had 3 motorcycles. Yeah, secondhand. And one was a 1-cylinder Indian Prince, and then I had a 4-cylinder Indian Racer, and then I had a 2-cylinder Harley Davidson. So I had enough playthings, but mostly they were used to go from junior high and high school to the building job, where I had jobs to do, picking up scrap, cleaning up this building site. And there was always some job to do somewhere.
So where'd you go to high school?
Went to high school at Southwest High, and it had just built it out near, it's around 65th and was it Warner Road, probably. Anyway, it was a brand new high school, and I went there I did 4 years there, and then at the end of 4 years, I always liked sports, but I was so small I couldn't go out for football or basketball, and I played basketball in the church leagues, but I couldn't, I was too small for high school. But when I remember wanting to play in front of my folks, and so finally I got into a good church league, and they could come and see me play.
So what year did you graduate?
I graduated in 1931.
Did you have a favorite subject?
I think it was history. Yeah. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
And so you played basketball for church so your parents could watch?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mostly. Uh-huh. But I enjoyed sports of all kinds. Of, whenever the sport was in season, like baseball, the kids were, I don't remember where we lived, we'd get together and play. You know, there was a lot of vacant lots, and we had plenty of place to play ball or do track. I remember we used to pole vault and high jump and, you know, do all this. We'd make our own hurdles and things. But if you weren't a certain size, I mean, there wasn't any point in trying to go out for sports in high school.
Right.
So, but I still enjoyed them. So we made do, as they say.
Well, during that time period was the Depression was on. Do you have any memories from?
Oh, the Depression.
From that?
I remember the Depression, and the only thing I really recall was my father took away all the credit cards. Yeah, nobody had a credit card or could charge anything anymore, and so you know, you just live within your means. And Mom, as I said, she kept the money under control, and but they were building. They got to where they were building 2 and 3 houses at a time, and in the early 30s they got caught, and they just were about that far from bankruptcy. So they had to give up, you know, all the property they hadn't paid for, and houses that were half built, and it was a tough time for a couple of years there. But we got over it, and we did a lot of different things to make a little money here and a little money there. But
And they stayed in the business all through that period.
well, my dad's, you know, always had this job,
And then
a position at American Steel Wires. He was office manager of this. It wasn't a very big office or warehouse, but I mean they warehoused all kinds of cable and wire fencing and that sort of stuff. And so he had a steady income that was cut quite a bit during the Depression, and he made up for it. I'll never forget the time he came home with a bunch of material, and what it was, and a punch, like a paper punch. You could punch holes in something. And it must have been just when Band-Aids started coming out. And he figured out, and we lined up, and we had like a production line where we put these things together and punch the holes and package them, and he'd sell them. I don't know who he sold them to, but I mean, he had it all figured out, and I can still remember punching these holes in these Band-Aids. And that was back in the 30s. But we survived the Depression pretty well. We were never big spenders, so we didn't have to pull back too much.
well, once you finished high school, what did you do?
Okay, I worked a year after high school at Swift and Company, and took some courses at the Kansas City Junior College, which was an excellent school. And but the first year I didn't go to. I just worked, but the second and third and fourth years I went 3 years to junior high school, took about everything they had to offer, and even geology, and then applied to Wharton School in Philadelphia at the University of Pennsylvania, and was accepted. They took all my credits from the Kansas City Junior College, which was about 120, I think, and so I in 1935 got on a train and went to Philadelphia, and got my dorm room in the quadrangle and started in school there. And finished my college days at the University of Pennsylvania and graduated in '37 with a business degree. It was an bachelor's economics.
Well, why that particular college?
Well, it's a good question, and I can't really recall.
That's a long way from
But
Kansas.
oh yeah, but And it really wasn't in that high a standing with like Harvard. It was Harvard, it's always been Harvard, Wharton, blah, 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 Northwestern. But I think my dad must have had a friend whose kids went to Wharton, because it was the one business school that we knew about in Kansas City, other than the University of Missouri in Kansas. And so I think it was his idea, and if he and my mom got together, I mean, if they decide that's what you're going to do, that's what you're going to do. So I gave Mom all my money, and so we had enough money for the $400 of it. That was the tuition for a semester, and I rode the train back there and got going, and I had quite a time.
What was in your suitcase?
What?
What was in your suitcase on that trip?
Just few clothes.
Just one,
I
though?
didn't have a lot, but I had some. And the University of Pennsylvania is located on Walnut Street, and it's not. You can walk from the campus to downtown to Wanamaker's, the big department store in Philadelphia, and many times, with I'd walk down there, and I had one of my I went out for crew to start with, and I don't know why I did that, but I did, and I made the crew. I made 150-pound crew, and you went out for crew right after school about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and you rode till about 5:30. And you came home and ate and studied and went to school and blah, blah, and the same thing, 5 days a week. And but I just loved it. I just thought it was the greatest thing, and I still can't figure out how I got started in crew. But I'm sure somebody convinced either my father or somebody that was the thing to do. But anyway, you met a lot of different people from different parts of the country, and so I had a good time there. When I was a senior, I became we had dorms around a quadrangle, and one of them was Provost Tower, which was at the corner of one of the part of the quadrangle. And my senior year, I was a proctor. That was it, not a provost, a proctor. He's just like an overseer, somebody to look after these guys. And I had 32 freshmen in my dorm, and my job was to keep them in school and make sure they studied and did all. And my first year, well, the only year as a proctor, I had two kids that I couldn't get to study. One of them was a son of a guy that had about 5 shirt stores in New York City, and I couldn't keep that kid away from pinball machines to save my life. And every time I thought I had him, I'd go down by the campus store, and there'd be pinball machines instead of being. He was smart as a whip. And the other one was a guy named Thames Bixby, and he was the son of the publisher of the Muskogee paper. And the Bixby family is pretty well known down there. But Thames was a tall, like just good old country boy. And yes, I can see this blonde hair hanging out over his eyes, and he was probably 6'1", and I got him interested in crew, and he became the stroke of the freshman crew. Well, comes during the mid-year, and the grades are out, and he ain't got. And so I'm stuck with this kid in my dorm, and I'm supposed to see that he's the stroke of the freshman crew, And the coach, I went to the coach and see. I said, you know, Rusty, would you consider going before the executive committee and you know, give a good pitch for Tans, because he needs the camaraderie of these guys, and he needs to be under people like Rusty Calla, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, he said, I've never done that for anyone in my life. And I said, well, would you just do it this once? And so he did. And he and I, Rusty Calla and I, became good friends over that. Yeah, but they didn't do any good. I mean, he got kicked out. His father came, and he didn't help any, and so we, you know, he was.
You can only do so much.
Yeah, you can. But anyway, that was crew. The crew was a big part of my life then.
So after you graduated from there, what next?
From Pennsylvania. That was in 1937. And 1937 was the depth of what we called the repression. We had the Depression in 32, 3, and then came the recession. And it was the worst time of all, and that's when the year I graduated. And ordinarily, Pennsylvania would have a whole bunch of recruiters come there after, you know, at graduation to recruit young men to go to work for their companies. And I always wanted to go to work for a certain company, but they didn't have anybody down there that year. But they had a guy come from a newly formed corporation. It was formed by 5 Jewish guys who each had a company that made and manufactured glues and starches and adhesives, you know, this sort of thing. And they combined together and called themselves the National Starch Products. And they sent a fellow out to recruit. And so actually he's the president of the company. And the fact that I played golf, I think, was the only thing. And I never played a round of golf with him or ever played golf while I worked for him. I was, you know, too busy and didn't pay enough. Anyway, but I went to work for them, and I had, my territory was the 6 New England states. And here I am from Kansas City, Missouri. And so I started out, and of course, you know, got plenty of opportunity there. All you have to do is dig it up and find it, and try to, because everybody in some way or other, if you're manufacturing or whatever, you use some sort of an adhesive. I mean, to seal a box or a paper boxes or, you know, whatever. I mean, there's a big market out there. It's just finding it and having the product to fill the need they have. But I did that for almost 10 years.
During World War II then?
I didn't go to World War II. I was married and had 2 kids, and 2 boys. They were born in 40 and 42. And I never was drafted, but I got to know the draft board guys in Hartford, Connecticut, where I lived, and I said, you know, I'd like to get in this thing. And he said, you haven't got a chance. He said, here, first of all, you got 2 children, and second, you're in an industry that's classified as essential to the defense, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, forget it then. So anyway, that's how, but I spent the war years just working. It's like in my job. And that, in about 1946, I came out to Oklahoma, where my brother was a doctor in Yale, Oklahoma. And it's a town of 1,200 people, as you probably know, between Stillwater and Tulsa, Highway 51. Mm-hmm. And he had read an advertisement in a medical journal about a lying-in hospital an empty lying-in hospital in this town of 1,200 people, and the fellow that owned it was the druggist in town, and he wanted a doctor to come and open it up. It was like for a hospital for unwed mothers and this sort of thing. And so my brother goes down there and looks it over and decides what he's going to do. So that summer I was off school, and so I helped him move down there and get him set up. And then when I left National Starch Products, I came back to Yale. My mother and father had moved there since they retired, and my brother could take care of them, and so she convinced me to come down there. And my brother was in a lot of different things at the time. He was raising peanuts during the war, and watermelons, and getting all the farmers around there to change their cropping habits, and it's like a regular missionary.
Yes.
But anyway, we worked night and day, I'd say. And I checked one time, I think I made about a nickel an hour.
Well, when you moved to Yale, what was your job?
My job was to take over running of this farm. He was going to have an ideal farm. We're going to take this rundown 320 acres and that a guy had raised 7 children on, and you couldn't drive a tractor over it, much less a car. I mean, it was so full of gullies and things, and we went in there, and I remember I had a Ford tractor with what they call a blade on it. It was a big round circular thing, and you go like this, and you'd pile dirt like that, and you come around, put some more, you build terraces. And terraces would keep the water flowing in the right way down to a pond. You'd have a pond dug, and anyway, I did that on about 300 acres, and refenced it, and then I said, what are we going to do? We planted Lespedeza and hairy vetch and oats, and it all came up and it looked so pretty. I said, well, what are we going to do with it? So my brother and I decided, well, let's get some feeders and canners and cutters and let them feed on that and fatten them up and sell them. So I went down to the stockyards here in the city. Nobody. I had never been to stockyards before, and I didn't know how to buy. And luckily, I ran into a guy that was pretty friendly, and told him what I was trying to do. And he said, let me help you a little. So I bought 100 head of cattle, and some of them, I mean, you wondered how they even walked. But anyhow, I thought the thinner they were, the more we could put on them. So we brought them home, put them out in the field, and they just ate like crazy. And so it got winter, and we had a snowstorm. And I went out there that first day, and I saw there was a cow down at the corner where I turn in, and standing over something, and it had just given birth to this calf, and I looked at the calf, and I hate to admit, I didn't know whether it was a male or female. I couldn't tell where I stood. And I told my neighbor, hey, I got a calf. He said, what, you got a bull or a heifer? I said, God, I don't know. I said, come. So, and it was a heifer. And so anyway, that was my introduction to the cattle business. So, we raised cattle for a few years. And then, as I said, we had been in this Better Pasture contest put out by Skelly Oil Company of Tulsa, and we won the contest. but we were renting this land from the Pawnee Indians, and when it got out that we had won this prize, they tripled the rent. And I was so mad. I said, I won't put a foot on that land again. And so I called my neighbor next door, Homer, and I said, Homer, how would you like to have that 320 acres? He said, he said, I love it. And I said, now they've raised the rent. He said, I don't care. It's still good land. And so he took it over. I got out of the cattle business.
And then what?
Oh, let's see, that would be, really haven't thought about that much.
Did you stay in Yale?
I stayed in Yale. I forgot to tell you that as soon as I moved down there, the druggist was an alcoholic. Only one drugstore in town, and he went on a binge, and my brother couldn't get his prescriptions filled, and so we bought the drugstore, and the pharmacist was still okay, so we took him in as a partner, and he ran the drugstore, so we had it open. Well, then my next door neighbor had the variety store, which was across the street from the drugstore, and he wanted to sell out. You know, this is right after the war. And so I bought him out. And of course, what he had was all this wartime merchandise, this ersatz stuff that it wasn't worth a nickel, you know, and I paid full price for it. So I had to work my way out of that mess. And then I had no sooner got that taken care of than the fellow next door to the grocery store, the variety store, had a dry goods store, and he wanted to get out of that and go into oil business. So I bought him out, and then the next year, the supermarket next to him, he was on a school board and raising all kinds of hell, and so my brother-in-law and I, who were partners at that time, bought him out. And we had these 3 stores, so we just got a passageway through the walls, and then you could go in and shop. A variety store, a dry goods store, and then across the street was a drugstore. So I didn't say that. In 1946, right after the war, my brother-in-law, who had been not badly injured, but he had been injured in the war, and lived in New Jersey, where he had married to my wife's sister. And I had taken him in as a partner. So we just ran the things together. And then the Dale Carnegie people came through Oklahoma putting on programs to get people excited about Dale Carnegie courses, and they were looking for someone to be a Dale Carnegie leader. So my brother-in-law, who wouldn't even go to the first meeting, went to the second meeting, signed up, and left our business and went with Dale Carnegie and never saw him again. So here I was stuck with all this stuff, and I was the only one left. So the banker and I made a deal, and he came out whole, and I still had, I think, a few thousand left, and I just came to Oklahoma City, and my mother had invested with Investors Diversified Services, which is probably the first mutual fund company in America, and I knew the salesman that called on her, and so I talked to him about maybe going to work for them and see if I could make a nickel. And he put me in touch with their district manager, etc. And so we talked. And it turns out the district manager, about 6'6" guy, had gone to Wharton 2 years before I had. And he knew kind of what I knew about the business world. And so I got a job. Well, I can't believe I was still so stupid that I didn't know that in a situation like that, generally they had a rule that you could draw, let's say, a week's pay and then pay it back out of commissions. Otherwise, you went to work for nothing. In other words, you worked strictly on commissions. And I didn't know until years later I could have had a draw. And I lived on nothing for a couple of years until I got started. And then I was going pretty good, but it was all sales but that was probably the biggest jolt I had. That I was so dumb. I didn't know that was going on all the time. So anyway, that's pretty much how that all wound up. And then when I came to, as I said, when I came to Oklahoma City, I didn't know anyone, didn't have anything, and I did. I had a friend who was an Episcopal priest that I'd become good friends with when he was in Cushing, which was not far from Yale, and I went to church there. And Father Conley and I became good friends and helped one another for a number of years.
Sounds like you were pretty good at risk taking,
Yeah.
or maybe out of necessity.
I don't know. Well, I think I'm luckier, but more lucky than good. But it's just the way the cards got dealt, and you had to play them the best way you knew how.
And your wife and your children moved each time?
Well, my first wife, the mother of my two boys, developed some kind of personality problems, and she I don't know what the definition of it is, but it's real high, real low, real high, real low, and to make a long story short, she went to visit one of her relatives down in Texas, and something must have happened. Anyway, she was put into a mental institution, and after she came out, they must have done like a lobotomy or something. Mm-hmm. Anyway, she was real docile, and I bought a little house up in Edmond on 12th Street, I remember, and we settled in there. And then one day she had a myocardial infarction, which is instant death, and she was going into a closet to get some, and so she passed away then. And then I wasn't married for a few years, and then I met a lady at church, sang in a choir with me, and we married, and we were married 6 years. And she had twins and 2 older boys, so she had 4 children. And her husband was an alcoholic, and she worked at the Medical Research Foundation. It was a secretary there, and went to church at the same Episcopal church I went to in Edmond. But
6 children to keep up with at that point, huh?
Yeah. Anyhow, after we married, and as I say, 6 years, and then I think a few years later she passed away.
How old were your 2 sons when they're
Let me see,
when they
how
were
old
passed?
would I have been then? Huh.
Now, how old were your sons?
Oh, my sons.
When your
Oh,
wife,
my
when
sons?
their mother passed away.
When their mother passed away, let's see, she passed away in 66.
So in their 20s?
Yeah,
18,
let's see. They were probably 66. Never even given that any thought.
Were they still in school?
Oh, no.
They were already out of high school?
Yeah. Yeah. Now,
And then you met your current wife, how?
well,
Since she's not here, you can...
you know, she's, I don't know how I get into all these things. Anyhow, I joined up with 3 other fellows. There were 4 of us in an office, and we just kind of shared the expenses, and we always needed a secretary between us, and so the one we had left, and since I was the older of the bunch, I had the privilege of bringing on a new secretary, and so I I had met a young fellow who, though he wasn't a client, but he worked for some clients of mine. And I was telling him, I said, you know, I sure wish there was a way I could find a really good secretary. And he said, well, I have a friend who just moved back and moved in with her parents. She has 2 children, and she came in. She's separated from her husband, and she might be. So I said, well, send her. So he did, and we all interviewed her, and they all agreed she fit in. So we hired her, and that was how I met her. And then she was there about 6 months. And she had 2 children, and they were living with their father in Houston, and she wanted to be closer to them, so she left and went to Houston. And then we kept up a friendship, and it evolved into a marriage, and we've been married since, I think they've been married 40 years.
40?
I was 60, and she was, 33, yeah. 27 years.
That's 40 years is pretty good too.
Well, that's quite a span, you know. But you know, you don't know how much water's gone over the dam until you step back and look, and look at it a while.
Sure.
But like God, I can't believe all that's happened.
She didn't come back and work for you though.
Uh-huh.
After you got married, she didn't work for you.
No.
No.
Mm-mm.
And I understand you took up golf again.
Yes, I played when I was in high school. I was on the golf team in Kansas City, and I just didn't have time and didn't have the money to take off and play golf. And so at 69, I decided, my gosh, it's now or never. So at 69, I was well enough off where I could do that, and I played every day. I mean, I played, and when I was 71, I shot my age, which is which is
That's pretty
it's
good.
not a record, but I mean, it's something to, you know, you can say, you ever shout your age? Yeah, once.
Did you usually walk or do a cart?
I rode mostly and had a walk some. But I was always active and in some fashion or other.
Sure.
Yeah.
And when was the last time you played around?
You know, that has two connotations.
Well, answer
Now
whichever way
you're
you want to
delving
do
into
it.
secrets. No,
Golf.
no. It's been at least 3 or 4 years.
Hard on the back to swing, I guess, at this age. Hard on the back.
No, it wasn't hard on the back. It was just that I couldn't hit the ball far enough to make it worthwhile. And so I just made the decision to stop. And my eyesight has deteriorated over the years. And now today, right now, I'm very difficult to read without my reader over there, which amplifies or multiplies. It's probably 2 or 3. I think it's 5 times. You know, if it prints that size, it's 5 times bigger. So no, it's reading and anything to do with eyesight is not one of my specialties anymore.
It's a challenge.
I do read quite a bit with that thing, but it takes a while.
What do you usually read?
Oh, I read good books, and I read the financial pages, and I read. That's about all.
Well, since we're talking about that a little bit, describe a typical day for us now. Like what would a typical day be like?
Oh, for now.
Mm-hmm. How early would you get up?
Oh, I get up about 7:30, and then have breakfast, and by 8:30, 9 o'clock, I'm usually ready to go. But I don't go anywhere anymore, usually. And
Lunch,
okay.
But today you are, yes.
But yeah, Thursdays we have a Thursday lunch bunch, and I've tried to make it. They're not they're not people that I normally pal around with, or I don't pal around with much with anybody, but this one fellow, Steve Jones, is he's kind of he's in a way a promoter, and in a way I'd call him more of an entrepreneur type person, and he's the kind of a fellow that I don't know about. Women and friends are different than men and friends. Mm-hmm. Men friends are. It takes a certain kind of personality to attract a number of men to get together and do something. But this fellow is that type of man, and I've enjoyed. It's something unusual in my life, but I've enjoyed this particular individual, and but it's amazing how many times your life changes, and the type of person that you're attracted to, and for whatever reason.
So what time would you go to bed if you get up at 7:30?
Oh, I probably go to bed around 10:30. Mm-hmm.
Very good.
Yeah. And usually I can can go to sleep pretty well. If I can't, I have I've come up with a way to go to sleep without taking a sleeping pill or something. And I get up, go out in the kitchen, and make myself a cup of hot chocolate and a graham cracker.
And that works?
Yeah. By the time I'm through, I go and lie down and I go to sleep. It just worked like that. But
What do you attribute your longevity to?
genes, I think there's a lot of that. I had one of my mother's sisters lived to be 104. Another one about 100. And I think my father's mother lived to be 96. And, that's, put all those together, and it's pretty.
Well, how old were your parents then when they
Well,
passed?
my parents, my dad was about 72. He had you might say Alzheimer's, I would say. They called it something else back then. And my mother was 87.
Oh.
But my grandfather, and as I said, on my mother's side, there were a number of long life people. But on my father's side, the only one I know about is my grandmother, his mother.
Is that German blood?
Oh, yes. I know.
Well, what's the biggest challenge you have today?
Today?
Yeah, but being 100, what's
Oh, gosh, Tanya, I don't.
the vision?
Vision is the big thing, but then there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
Something you can do about is just what the things you're interested in, and getting involved in them. And I can't do that anymore. I mean, I can't go out and sponsor this or that. I just don't have I can't move around good enough anymore. I think being able to navigate is my biggest problem.
And through the years you were active in the community,
I've always tried to be.
so that would play into this
Yeah,
too.
I guess luckily I've lived in smaller communities, like Yale and Edmond, when years ago wasn't nothing.
No.
Yeah, and
10 years ago even.
oh gosh, well I'm talking about 19. Let's see. Well, I think there were 2 doctors in Edmond. Yeah, and I remember one of them telling me, and there was 1 pharmacy. Yeah. He said one of these days there's going to be 20 doctors here. I said, you gotta be kidding. He said, no. But there are at least that many, if not more.
Well, besides golf, what would you do for fun?
Oh, let's see.
Music or dance? Any?
Well,
Cards
I
or-
like music, but haven't thought anything about dancing for a while. But I enjoy dancing. Yeah. But I enjoy people who have a different lifestyle from mine, and I enjoy hearing episodes of their life, what they're doing, contemplating doing.
Well, you have a circle of friends too. Obviously, it brings it your.
Well,
Brings you dessert.
Mark is he's a kind of a business associate, you might say, but he's become a good friend, and because of the nature of my business life, it has restricted my activities with people of my own age and my own characteristics. In other words, I don't fraternize a lot with people who are big party goers and that sort of thing. I just don't have the nature. I don't even guess it, but it's just not my nature to whatever they call partying. But they like to do it. It's great.
Well, do you have a philosophy or a motto that you live by in life?
I don't know that I could put it in words, Alex. It's just, I try to be a builder, and I think I get that from having lived in smaller towns. And if you don't do something, nothing will get done.
I read somewhere where you did town and gown in Stillwater.
I did.
You want to talk
I
a little
did
bit
for
about
about
that?
3 or 4 years.
Long
I was
time
trying
ago.
to think of that gal's name who was head of the drama department at OSU.
That would have been around in the 50s or
It would be in the
40s?
60s.
In
Wouldn't
the
it?
while you were living in Yale?
Yes, yeah, it would be before 65. Yeah.
And did you act or did you help with?
I acted, and I did other things, whatever needed doing, but mostly I acted. I had we did my first play was was a Tennessee Williams play, and I was I had a very, very small part, but as I went along, I got bigger parts, and then I had a couple of leads, and one time, when I think my first lead, the lady from Shiloh or something like that, Tennessee Williams. Anyway, I was living in Yale. We still had the drugstore. This was opening night, and I just felt real sick. So anyway, and I had a cold, and so I remember going into the drugstore, and Elsie, the pharmacist, wasn't there at the moment, and I went over and got a bottle of, I forgot what it was, but there wasn't a lot left in it, and I don't know how old it was. Anyway, I took a tablespoon of it. It like to kill me. And I didn't know if I was going to go on that night or not. Oh, it was, I don't know. And they told me later, it should have been thrown out 5 years ago or something. Anyway, I never did anything like that again. I never touched a bottle of anything in that pharmacy.
But the show went on.
Yeah, the show went on. I was so sick, and I went over there, and one of the other leads was a doctor from Perkins, and his wife was the director of the play, and I told them about it, and she said, "Man, you're lucky to be alive." But anyhow, it was one of those unfortunate, dumb things I did.
And that was before there were regulations that would have prevented you from doing that.
Yeah, right. Well, anything you can think of that I can't think of, I'll try to recall.
Did you ever think you'd make it to 100?
No. Never never even gave it a thought, Alex. Just, all of a sudden, and I don't know how many times I've wondered in the last year or so, where did the last 9 years go? I mean, I can hardly remember living these last 9 years. I don't know what happened.
Time flies.
Yeah, it just, all of a sudden, and I said, well, where are they gone?
And did you do anything special for your 100th birthday?
Oh gosh, yeah, JC put on a wing ding you wouldn't believe. It was in the paper, and well, there's a copy of the thing that went in the paper, and a friend of ours put it on, and it's on the wall over there if you want to look at it. But yeah, she put on the biggest party, and then we had my birthday was on the 13th, which was a Sunday, April 13th, and she had rented the 3 ballrooms at the Embassy Suites up here, and we had a sort of a open house from 2 to 5, and my God, I never saw so many people. Yeah, well, free food and drinks, what do you expect? But no, it was quite a shindig. Yeah, she is a great hostess.
Do you have anything left on your bucket list? Do you want
On
to
my
do
bucket list?
on your bucket list?
Oh, not really, Tanya. I due to physical impediments, I'd say. It's just, I don't feel free to dream a whole lot about physical things, like going somewhere or doing something physical, and it's evidently not my nature to. You can't, don't do it.
Don't do it.
Don't worry about it.
Well, the Senior Open was just in Edmond, so
Yeah.
that would have been.
Yeah, I went to one of those a year or so ago. Yeah, that's a great event for Oak Tree to have that here.
If history were written, what would you want it to say about you? When history is written, what do you want it to say about you?
Oh my gosh.
That's a big question.
Oh yeah, it is. It really. Well, I don't know. All I can say is he was here 100 years, and he gave it all he had. And I really benefited, I think, more than I gave. I've had so many lives that you can't. You can never, you just can't quibble with that. I mean, there's something about having lived that long and experienced that much. And there's always something that comes up to remind you of something good that happened to you. There's always something like that happening.
And you've moved around so much, where do you consider home?
Oh, I'd say Kansas City and Norman. Yeah, I lived I've almost forgotten the 10 years I lived in New England. So much has happened since then that it's kind of crowded it out.
But the years in Yale are alive and well.
Yes, Yale was an experience. Believe me.
I can't imagine all
I
that.
mean, when I look back on it, you know, and I think that is certainly not what one would expect from someone with your background. You know, having born in Kansas City, went to Wharton, wound up in Yale.
And owned half of it.
Huh?
And owned about half of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's so incongruous. I mean, it just, you know, baffles me.
Are those buildings still standing?
Most of them,
Are they?
there's one building, I think, next to the, maybe one up from the drugstore that burned. It was the movie theater, yeah, I think. And, but other than that, I think they're all standing. The last time I was there.
And the pharmacy's still there.
Yeah.
Pharmacy's
Yeah,
still
the
there.
drugstore's still there. And,
Well, do
Yeah.
you think being married to a younger woman has contributed to this long life?
it's very possible, yeah. I
Possible.
really don't know much about that type of thing, and, but if you reason it out, it makes sense.
Yeah.
It,
Certainly
it
hadn't
would.
hurt.
I mean, I've had to stay, you know, younger
Yes.
most of my life,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, so I'd have to agree with you. That makes a difference.
Well, do you have a favorite memory?
A favorite memory?
One or two
Yeah.
highlights of your
I
life?
don't really
You
think
don't?
so. I mean, they're all, so many of them are just outstanding to me anyway. And, but,
You have great fortitude.
well, yeah, imagine that. It's a matter of having to. You don't have a choice. Unless you like death. And I don't really worry about death very much. Whenever I'm talking to God, you know, I say, you know, and if maybe a friend of mine died or something, you know, why pick on him? Look at me. I'm not worth a bucket of spit. And here you take this guy, he's in the prime of life and blah, 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 you know. And I just kind of hear God say, it's none of your damn business.
He's not done with you yet.
You know, no, he sure is not. And I keep asking him, what do you want? What haven't I given yet? But anyway, that's just between us.
Well, if there's not anything else you want to add, we'll sign off and.
Okay,
And
well,
we'll
if you
say-
don't, anything you want to ask, I'm,
No, I think you're getting tired too, so thank you very much for sharing with
you're
us.
very welcome,
Been a
Tanya.
pleasure.
Thank you for taking the time and picking me.